What hobby makes you immediately think, this person grew up rich? Polo. Anything that doesn't match the climate of where they grew up. If they grew up in the desert but they're ace skiers, then I assume they had the money to travel a lot and own all the gear, etc. Edit. I should clarify my statements are based on my experience in Australia. I was unaware that Yank geography had so many places you could ski close to deserts. In Australia there are only about 2 places you can do it, and it's super expensive. It was much cheaper in Europe, which is why I learned there, but growing up, the only people I knew who did it regularly were super rich. My fiancé was telling me a story about the exchange students that lived with them and how they were so nice and would help take care of the house. I asked her why her exchange students stayed with them for so long, when all my high school exchange student friends had only stayed for a semester. It was at that moment she realized that she grew up with Swiss nannies. Anything involving owning a horse. My grandfather was a country club type of guy. My uncle, who's incredibly wealthy, has the hobby of building and flying his own airplanes. There are apparently kits, but he has also bought and repaired little 2-seater planes that went down. Go-karting. Not the kind at arcades and stuff, but the real kind. It's how you get into Formula 1. Rich. Polo. Super rich. Elephant polo. Sailing. If they're under 30. Aviation. If they're over 30. Hell, probably still aviation. Hunting humans on private islands. Fine art collecting. It takes serious money to even consider going down that path. Also a certain type of education. I know several people who work at a desk, but got their pilot's license just because. Horse dressage for sure. I know some middle-class folk who own a horse or 2 on a farm, but if you're riding in competitions, you're likely wealthy. Scuba diving. Then they name all the places in the world they've scuba dived. Most winter sports. That gear ain't cheap. Not really a hobby, but people that go to Disneyland, Disney World at least once a year despite living several states away. Going to space while wearing a dumbass cowboy hat. I was gonna say Magic the Gathering, but turns out it's my imagination limited by poverty. Karting. Gonna be honest. A lot of hobbies when you get into the top tier of things get very expensive. A lot of stuff mentioned here can be done on the cheap with ingenuity and passion for the hobby, sport. For me, it's when a person starts a new hobby and buys the nicest equipment. That's when you know. Fencing. Falconry. When I got to college and realized that no one else knew how to snowboard or wanted to go trap shooting with me, I had to adjust my hobbies to slack lining and frisbees. Collecting and driving sports cars. Lacrosse, for some reason. As someone who plays golf. Definitely golf. ETA, I am aware that you can play golf for cheap. But the really dedicated folks who get top-of-the-line equipment and use expensive balls because they broke 90 once definitely spend a shitload of money on golf and probably aren't super responsible with money, hence, that guy grew up rich. I love seeing people defending so many of these activities as not being rich people shit, lol. But then they mention some very specific reason why they were able to do the activity for a decent price. Being in the upper levels of competitive gymnastics. My daughter is only 6 and it already cost us $350 a month, plus another $1,000 a year for travel and $450 a year for leotards, jacket, pants and bag. If she sticks to it into her middle, high school years and keeps excelling, we are looking at $1,000 plus a month for gym fees and booster club plus travel fees and uniforms, so probably closer to $1,500 plus a month when you factor that stuff in. We are upper middle class and right now can afford it, but I'm not so sure about when she gets older and once our other kid gets into sports too. You definitely have to have some money to afford it. It's like paying for college. When people say, especially anonymously, that one of their hobbies is travel, I get rich vibes off of that. Sometimes it's aspirational, but realistically if you're not rich you just don't have the money or availability to travel a lot. Racing of any real kind, whether it be quads, dirt bikes, mini sprints, etc. That shit is not cheap. I'm in my 30s and I have friends with stupid careers that own homes and travel all the time. If you have an adult friend that makes jewelry or pottery for a living, they're full of shit and come from wealth. Car collection, customization. Car people with more than one hobby car. Following a band around the country, world. Horseback riding, horse care looks expensive as fuck. Crew. Dolls. If they had an absurd amount of certain dolls and collect them they were rich. Especially if they still have them as an adult. Lady I babysit for has hundreds of dolls and an entire room filled with them. It's as creepy as it sounds. The whole room has its own insurance policy worth close to $1 million, that's how valuable it is. Most of these were collect when she was a child. Astrophotography. The telescope is expensive enough, but the camera, sheesh, exploding head. Of course this was before the pandemic hit, but going on multiple cruises every year, and they aren't travel agents. Being fired up into low Earth orbit for 5 minutes. Horses, go-karting. Mountain climbing in remote places in the world. Went to a work mandatory motivational speaker whose spiel was climbing Everest 4 times starting at age 22 and other mountains in Africa, Europe, and Asia. Guess I did not land the correct job out of college. Hockey, especially if they were a goalie. Fox hunting. Ice hockey. Ice time is expensive. Squash. A person that's mountain biking insanely good at a young age. Hunting as a hobby could mean you grew up really rich, or really poor. You might spend thousands of dollars on the fanciest new gun, scope, spotting scope, fancy waterproof jacket, bottle of deer piss, and a bunch of other stuff you probably don't know how to use, and then spend even more on a bush plane and a professional guide to carry half your stuff and help you find the animal and do everything short of pulling the trigger for you. OR. You grew up going out into the woods after school with grandpa's old shotgun and shooting squirrels out of the trees to make a stew out of to feed to your family. Sailing, boating. If my Phil is anything to go by, diving. But then he does have all his own gear, and a very expensive underwater camera. And accessories.